Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountain top to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that came from within my beloved mountains, and we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, History, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping back by. Since there was a bit to say about a corporate greed last week, I figure we might as well just keep hound dogging the powers that be one more round. Now, this story ain't about no murder, not the kind done with a knife or a Saturday night special. This one's about pride, progress, and the old mountain sand my granddaddy liked to spit out while he was spitting his tobacco juice and whittling a stick down to a toothpick. What feeds you'll kill you if you stare too long at the pot and never mind the fire. Now, friends, that pot was boiling good down in Kingsport, Tennessee in the year of our Lord 1960. So pour you a tall one, tuck in a dip or a spoonful of old rooster snuff if you got some hid away somewhere, and lean back. This one rolls on long and as mean as a coal train dragging through the hollers at midnight. Before I kick it off, let me tell you that most of the pictures I'm sharing today come from the archives of the city of Kingsport, local newspapers, and still shots from an actual 8mm film that was taken the day of the tragedy. If you've ever been through Kingsport on a damp morning, you know that smell. Sweet and sharp, like a plum left too long in the moonshine still. Locals will grin and say, that's the smell of money, and they ain't lying. Eastman Chemical Company fed entire generations, bought Christmas presents, kept lights burning in holler cabins clear up to southwest Virginia and over into the Kentucky line. Now, from outside, Eastman was about as close to heaven as most working folks figured they'd get. Pensions, hot meals, a clinic, and health insurance, back when health insurance sounded like big city talk. Inside, though, it was Hell's Kitchen with a time clock on the wall. Big iron cauldrons humming and hissing, steam pipes straining up in the rafters, and men moving through it like ghosts who hadn't yet figured out they were past due. The right dead center of it all was all that steel and steam stood a man named Yusuf Haney. Folks called him Yus. He looked about like every other mountain man that you ever met. Them kind eyes, back a bit crooked from hard work, calloused hands that could fix almost anything, and a tiredness that coffee couldn't outrun. Now, the part of Eastman that owns this story is a place they called the Aniline Division. The Aniline boys were proud as a peacock in church. They made colored dyes for uniforms, for ministers' robes, for Sunday dresses, and for them Nashville stars whose names probably lived a little longer in mountain gossip than they did on the radio. They handled nitrobenzene, a sweet-smelling, mean-tempered devil of a chemical. Now, pretty in a bottle, and it was deadly in the air. Old-timers used to say that stuff's like bad liquor, goes down smooth, but sets you on fire from the inside. Now, you started at the aniline after the war boom, and when Eastman was riding high in the model city, was polishing its halo. He was born in Virginia, served as a lieutenant colonel in the war, and came off a little farm up in Scott County where, if you ain't ever been there, might I suggest you make time and go because it's beautiful. But school had been more of a suggestion for use than a requirement. What he knew came from busted tractors and stubborn engines. First time he saw Eastman, he said it looked like God had dropped a mechanical anthill on the side of the Holston River. The pipes crisscrossed every which way, towers stabbing at the sky, steam and smoke rolling off the water like a Whole town was simmering in a pot. The foreman that hired him never asked a single question about hopes or dreams, just looked at his hands and said, "You know your way around a wrench, Haney?" The youth told him, "Yes, sir." Then he asked, "You know your way about keeping your head down and doing what you're told?" And youth thought about it for a second and said, "Mostly, sir." Well, the foreman giggled a little bit and said, "Good enough. Annalene needs bodies on Monday, so don't be late. This place don't wait on nobody." In Annalene, once he started, he met a fella named Cecil. Every plant's got a Cecil, a man that can't quite keep his shirt tucked in and got something to say about nearly everything going on, and always got a cigarette half hanging out of his lip that's part of the way burnt. "Haney, you're wound tighter than a fence wire," he told him at lunch break one day. "Relax, this place been here for decades. Nothing's going to happen they ain't already wrote a procedure for." Of course, you just looked up at the pipes overhead and listened to the pumps thumping. "Procedures don't turn wrenches," he said. But Cecil grinned at him and just said, "Listen to this philosopher." By 1960, Kingsport was riding high. New houses, shiny cars, kids going to college off of Eastman paychecks. Folks bragged on the model city like it was their favorite ball team. But down in Annalene, some ears started to itch. Lines that had been built for one pace now ran hotter and faster. Maintenance got deferred, which is fancy talk for we'll fix it when it breaks and pray it don't kill nobody. And the Annalene boys knew the usual music of the place like they knew a good Bill Monroe tune. Good days sounded like a big, easy hum, pumps throbbing, steam sighing, steel rattling, just enough to mean it was alive, not enough to mean it was coming apart. Then the tune started warping a little bit. Gauges that once sat steady as a church elder, just started to tremble a little bit. Pressure needles tap danced between the lines. Thermistors crept up, half a hair and then half a hair again. One morning, early fall, Use did his rounds and frowned deeper than he usually did. He tapped the gauge, his needle shook, and then eased up higher, like it was trying to tell a secret. "We're running hotter than yesterday," he said, and yesterday was hotter than hell. Cecil wandered over, lunch pail under one arm. "You and them gauges ought to get a room, Haney. You worry about them more'n you do your wife." The youth said they ain't supposed to shake like that. Cecil told him, "Well, I ain't paid enough to be scared. They got them college boys down in building 207 for doing the thinking. We're just up here to keep the place from falling apart before quitting time." Youth didn't laugh, though. He tore off a piece of paper from his pad, wrote that the system was unstable and pressure was oscillating between normal, and then he signed his name real slow and careful. He sent it up the line. That note took the long, sad little journey that a whole lot of them warnings like that do, hand to hand, inbox to inbox, and it landed on some foreman's desk next to a coffee ring and a half-smoked Chesterfield. Somebody scribbled, "Well, we'll take a look," which is corporate for just don't blow us up before lunchtime. Then they went back to their cigarettes, coffees, and calendar. October 4th, 1960 was a Tuesday morning. Steam and smoke setting heavy off the Holston River, thick as Granny's thick as Granny's apple butter in a crock. Now, man shuffled through the turnstiles in coveralls that had already seen a few Eastman years ground into them. Now, the talk of the day was the Kennedy-Nixon debate from the night before. Of course, opinions were split down the middle like fence boards. "Nixon's sweating like a preacher caught by the steel," Howard Young said. "Kennedy fella smiling like he just stole a Buick," Dick Chadwell told him. Well, they ribbed each other and laughed a bit. Then they started betting on football games and promised to meet for a smoke after the shift was over. All the while, that big old plant grumbled under their boots. Around mid-afternoon, they say the air changed. A low hum turned to a pulse. Pipes twanged in the rafters. The floor shivered underfoot like something buried deep had done rolled over in its sleep. The old-timers glanced at each other. They had them tight expressions after something like that happened. "Mountain's getting restless," one of them said. "Folks that don't live around here think talk like that's just superstition. Folks that do know sometimes the mountains know first. Outside, it was one of them holy October evenings, gold light setting in the ridges, air smelling of leaves like it always did, and you smell that wood smoke and maybe a hint of rain thinking about coming in, but it ain't quite ready to go yet. Kingsport looked downright blessed from the outside, but under that pretty skin, hell was stretching its fingers. At 4:45 that evening, the Eastman Aniline Division just ceased to exist on this earth. People who were there will tell you the feeling that they had was the air going thick, like the whole world held its breath and forgot how to let go. Then came the light, not really looking like fire, but a quick flash of light, white gold with a mean green edge to it, flashing up from building 207, ricocheting off towers, reflecting off of every shard of glass it could find. The blast followed close behind, a roar big enough to knock a prayer right out of your mouth. 2 craters tore open where aniline used to be. They were deep enough to swallow trucks, ringed with the bones of the steel and the concrete. Shockwave rolled out across Kingsport like the hand of God done backhanded the whole valley. Windows shattered for miles. Pigeons dropped right out of the sky like somebody just cut their life strings off. Folks said it felt like the air turned to metal in their mouths. Concrete cracked like peanut brittle at a bake sale. 3 miles away, Mel Johnson thought the Russians had finally dropped the bomb. His boy Rick hit the schoolhouse floor the way they always trained us to do when I was a little feller, and he had his arms over his head, eyes squeezed shut, and waiting for the sirens, and no, that didn't come. Out by Fort Henry Drive, people saw a fireball raise up over the plant like Judgment Day done got there early. The sound rolled on, then cut out all at once, leaving a silence that hummed in the roots of your teeth, even if you had false teeth. Up close, all that nice, neat industrial order, pumps, pipes, charts, and all had been replaced with complete chaos. Steel twisted like licorice sticks, bricks half melted into glass, fire laughing out of the shattered drums, and the Holston River shone with a slick of rainbows where chemicals had been blasted into it and they spread out and the oil sting like angel wings. Now, people ran toward the fire, not away. Eastman workers, town folks, preachers, whose sermons had never prepped them for this kind of crap. Mel, once he realized it wasn't the Russians, did too. He dug through chunks of concrete and twisted metal till his fingers split open. He found one man still breathing. The blast had vaporized his features clean away. Found others who weren't breathing at all, faces gone blank the way the dead sometimes do, like they hadn't planned to clock out just yet, but they were just watching something. Howard Young clambered up on what used to be part of the lab roof. The sight near took his mind away. He stared down into the fire-bent steel, and his ears ringing so bad he could barely hear the phone when it somehow rang through the nearby shack. Believe it or not, it was his wife. She said, "Howard," and she was half crazed. She said, "You've blown the windows clean out of the house." He stared at the flames and just answered her flat as a 2x4. "Get off the phone, woman." And folks, that's mountain humor, but about dry enough to burn even as the end of the earth. The Holston Valley Hospital filled before supper. Nurses smoked in the hallways to steady their nerves. Doctors stitched and splinted under flashlight and prayer. They'd run a drill not long before about what to do if Eastman ever goes up. Nobody really thought that they'd live through the real deal, though. Men came in mangled, blistered, limping, and stunned. Some walked on their own, sat in a waiting room chair, and then realized that they were full of glass and shrapnel. Preachers paced the corridors, Bible in one hand, Pepto-Bismol in the other. Even the strictest teetotalers took a little bit of the medicine that night, I'd say. By dawn, the Kingsport Times laid it all bare in big print. 13 dead, more than 400 injured. 2 more died by breakfast and another the next day, for a 16 total. One of them, well, it was Use Haney. They found him near the base of the blasted tower with his hand on a valve like he was trying to wrestle back the doors of hell, well, with nothing but muscle and stubbornness. Back home, his boy Bruce didn't cry, at least not then. Just stared at the newspaper with his lips moving like he was counting something that only he could see. Cleanup lasted near about half a year. Eastman pulled chunks of reactor vessel out of the river, chunks of roof out of fields, and if you can believe it or not, one woman said that a twisted gear came straight through the roof and landed in her frying pan while she was frying up some chicken for supper. She said it sizzled like Judgment Day. Of course, there was investigations, hearings, and careful words, mixture of chemicals and water, nitrobenzene process, unexpected detonation, process upset conditions. Lawyers did the lawyer talk. Company men said safety's our top priority, with a straight enough face to, they'd practiced it in a mirror before, probably for days. But there ain't a cemetery big enough to hold ambition. Eastman rebuilt. By 1962, new pipes gleamed in the sun, fresh paint on the walls, men whistling down the line again. The model city healed on the surface, new families moved in, old scars were covered up with payroll stubs and progress. The mountain, though, well, it never forgot that Tuesday. 2 great craters where aniline used to be got filled in and paved over. Some of the heaviest pieces, like one big ring of steel from the reactor dome that had been thrown clear by the blast, buried itself in the ground. Too big to haul and too much trouble to cut up, so they just paved right over it and kept right on running. You can pave a hole, you can paint a wall, and you can stitch a body, but ghosts don't need a front door, they just need a place to be. Time rolled on like it always does, and one Sunday dinner at a time. Bruce grew up under the shadow of his smoking beast on the river. He tried to hate Eastman, tried to picture a life somewhere else, but round them parts, paychecks and grudges often come from the same place. Now, he married, had a young'un of his own, tried his hand at a couple of little jobs in town, turning wrenches at garages or laying block. Money was thin, hours were long, and every month the light bill reminded him who really fed Kingsport. One evening, sitting at his mama's kitchen table, after a Sunday dinner, and the sun shining in and the ghost of his daddy's seat was empty, he said, "It ain't right, Mama, working for the place that killed him." She stirred her coffee like she always did till the spoon clicked against the cup, and she said, "It wasn't the pipes that killed him. It was the men who made choices about him. Steel and steam don't care who dies. People do or they don't." All he said was, "Ain't it the same thing?" She said, "Not if you're trying to pay for shoes." Bruce said he still felt like it was betraying him. His mom looked at him and, for a second, and he saw the steel determination in her eyes, and she said, "Your daddy died at that valve with his hand trying to make things right. If you go in there and make them do it better, that ain't betrayal. That's finishing what he started." So, around 1980, Bruce Haney went and hired on at Eastman. Some folks in town called it foolish, others called it fate. He just called it work. First, they put Bruce on a utility crew, keeping him away from the exact spot his daddy died. Might have been politeness, might have been paperwork, who knows. Either way, his job was to mow, patch, haul, and help keep the plant's veins and bones from falling apart. He learned every back road inside them fences. One foggy morning, he was riding along a service road that wound past the aniline, where aniline once stood. Newer buildings sat there now, but the ground still had that uneasy feel in that one place that he remembered being ripped open. Now, the truck rolled over a stretch of asphalt that sounded wrong under the tires, a low bell-like ring of a hum or a thump. "Hold up," Bruce told the driver. He climbed out and walked back through the mist, stomped the boot on the ground, and where it was solid and took a step and stomped again. That time the ground rang up through his leg. He scraped his sole along the blacktop till metal peeked through. A curve of dull steel, then another, making a 6-foot ring set flush with the asphalt. The road, it looked like a halo, with maybe a heavy curse of a halo. "What is it?" the driver asked him. "Part of what killed 16 men," Bruce said. Later, an old-timer confirmed it. "Reactor dome ring," he said. "Blast throwed it like a horseshoe, stuck it halfway in the dirt, and the engineers looked at it, figured it cost more to cut up and haul off than to pave over, so here we are." From that day on, Bruce walked that road near every shift, but he never stepped dead on that ring. He'd angle his boot, and, a little to the side and skirt it like a fresh grave. "Superstitious?" a young feller asked him. "No, respectful," Bruce answered. "There's a difference." The years turned and the plant modernized. Computers crept in. Old panels grew dust, and new hires came in, probably knowing more about video games than they did valve stems. But a graveyard shift is still a graveyard shift, no matter how many LEDs you bolt on it. One night, on nights, the big noises die down and the little ones come out. Steam mutters, pumps grumble. Somewhere, a baron maybe sings a real high note, and that note, it's telling you to change me soon or regret it later. In one of the control rooms, not far from the buried ring, a row of old analog gauges lined the wall. They were relics from the days of before the computer screens. Their lines had been rerouted, their sensors tied into digital systems. Officially, they were just a decoration. They really wasn't hooked to anything. So Bruce noticed something they never put in the manuals. Every now and then, but especially close to October, those dead gauges would twitch. No steam flow, no pressure, nothing on the controllers, but the little needles would shiver, like they was answering some kind of a load only they could hear. "You see that?" Bruce asked another operator once. "Old junk vibration," the kid said, without even looking at him. "Air handler ain't running," Bruce pointed out. The kid rolled his hair over his cheek and said, "Well, they ain't hooked to nothing, so whatever they're doing don't matter." Bruce just thought that's what they thought back in 1960. It didn't matter. Security guards had their own tales. One of them, tough as a boot leather fella named Chet, told Bruce over coffee, "I ain't walking in that back stretch by myself no more." He said, "You scared of coyotes?" "Coyotes don't cough," Chet said. He talked about a night patrol, fog clinging low, when he heard footsteps on catwalks above where Building 207 used to be. Slow, measured boots on steel. Nobody was scheduled to be up there. His flashlight beam found nothing, but the steps went right on past, overhead, then stopping, followed by a deep, raspy cough like a man who'd been breathing bad air his whole life, and then the smell of almonds, sweet and wrong. I ain't never forgot that. And Bruce knew that smell from stories of nitrobenzene. Then Chet kept talking. "Something walked right through me. Cold. Not wind cold. I'm talking funeral home cold. I finished my round, turned in my badge, and told them I'd work any post they wanted except that one. Officially, nobody ever wrote it up. I mean, what would you do? Haunted by industrial dead? Unofficially, folks learned where not to hang out too long. On his days off, Bruce started visiting town archives and digging into old company newsletters. He unspooled microfilm reels and headlines about the day Kingsport wept. Now, he read tidy little summaries of an event that had blown his life sideways. He found the numbers: 16 dead, hundreds injured, nitrobenzene and nitric acid meeting water where they shouldn't have. Found mentions of unusual precipitates, process upsets, and recommendations that came a shade too late. What he didn't find was his daddy's name, not in the neat internal write-ups, not in the speeches about bravery nor lessons learned. They talked about our Eastman family and the pioneering spirit, but building stronger and safer. But the grit of the matter, the exact chain of warnings and shrugs, was buried deeper than that old reactor ring. Sitting at his mama's table one evening, Bruce said, "Seems like they turned a string of folks not listening into an unfortunate event." She nodded, and she's doing what she always done, stirred her coffee. "That's what big outfits do, sand off sharp edges till the slides right easier, and then but the sharp edges, well, they're still there. By the time new century signs started showing up in the calendars, Bruce was one of the gray heads. He trained newbies, walked them through alarms, showed them which squeaks meant trouble and which were just the old beast taking its sleep. Now, while you walk around that spot," one of them asked, and watching him, skirt that buried ring, "it's because I know what's under it," he said. The kid laughed, went out and stomped dead center just to prove it was all nonsense. The ring rang under his foot like it always does, like a big old sour note, and the kid's smile thinned a shade. He quit stomping after that. Now then, a strange little things would line up. A random equipment hiccup would settle down right around 4:45 on an October afternoon, and the gauges everybody swore were disconnected would twitch in the old aniline wing for no reason. A young guard would come in pale, saying that he heard radios talk where there wasn't no radio on the channel. One word floating clear, though, through the static was valve. Management had their explanations. The old hands had theirs. 57 years to the day after aniline blew itself into craters, Eastman had itself another bad Tuesday. Not in the same place, not with the same stuff, but trouble all the same. By then, the coal gasification and chemical side of the plant was doing its complicated dance, feeding coal slurry and oxygen into big hungry vessels to make gas, and that gas into other units to make the kind of chemicals you need to make just about every plastic and product in your house. The morning started quiet enough, cool fall air, flags hanging lazy, Eastman smell floating all over town, making some folks wrinkle their noses and others think overtime. Somewhere in that maze, water ended up where it wasn't supposed to be again, heading toward a gasifier, taking pure oxygen. Procedures said one thing, equipment said another, and suddenly you had upset conditions spreading like a bad rumor. Bruce was on site, older, slower, but still punching a clock. He spent his days by then more on safety and utilities on that side. Boilers, pressures, them boring systems that only seem interesting when they go wrong. Radios started chattering about anomalies, then about evacuations. They cleared folks out of the immediate area. Young operators looked jittery, brows all knit under their hard hats, the way that said their brains were running ahead of their training. Now, you know what day it is? Bruce asked one of them. He said Tuesday, October 4th. So the kid shrugged and said, "So?" "Never mind," Bruce said. A little while later, the first explosion went off, distant enough not to tear him apart, close enough that he felt it in his bones. Ground jumped, air thumped, sirens tripped. Another blast chased the first. Black and gray, smoke shoved up against the sky. Folks outside the fence were told to shelter in place, close your windows, stay indoors, wait till the air's cleared its throat out so you can open them back up. In 1960, at basically the same time and the same date, 16 men never came home. In 2017, with big steel vessels popping and flames kissing the sky, nobody died. Nobody was even hurt. Bad enough for the obituaries anyway. Official reports would later talk about valves that didn't do what they were supposed to do, oxygen where oxygen shouldn't have been, procedures that needed fixing. Fines were levied, promises were made, things got upgraded. Unofficially, there was one more detail. When them first alarms sounded, Bruce had been walking his usual route, which brought him, as it had for decades, right over that buried circle of steel behind where Aniline used to stand. Same old ring, same old habit. He started to skirt it, boots aimed just off center like always. That's when the cold hit him. Not a breeze off the Holston, not the little shiver of a man who suddenly remembered 1960. This was a different kind of chill. Feeling of standing in the doorway and somebody walking past who ain't casting a shadow. He smelled almonds. It was out of place. His feet stopped. One hand lifted if it was on its own accord, fingers curling out as if they was trying to turn a valve wheel or something. All the hair on his arm stood up. In the blink of an eye, somewhere between one alarm and the next, he heard a voice that he hadn't heard since he was 9. Not this time, it said, calm as anything. Then the fire hit somewhere in the plant, banging and roaring and flinging debris, but not into the crowds, not into the control room full of folks, and not into the exact place that would have turned that day into a repeat headline with a new date. Emergency crews ran, operators followed procedures, head counts came back complete. No wives waited on porches with their hearts in their throats, staring toward the glow and that they didn't even understand. Later, after all clear, after the shelter orders lifted and the reporters drifted off, Bruce walked back out to that old service road. For the first time in his life, he stepped dead center of that 6-foot ring of steel, put his full weight on it, felt the low hum of the metal and the memory under his boots. Thank you, he said. The voice soft enough that the wind almost stole it. You got the valve shut off this time, old man. No thunder rolled, no angel choir sang, but the almond scent was gone. The years since have added new chapters to Eastman's story and to Kingsport's. More incidents, more investigations, more promises from men in ties that this time they'll learn. Some days the plant hums smooth and steady. Some days it grumbles. The aniline division, as it was when it was gone, but its ghosts still make the rounds on the night shift. Now and then a gauge jumps for no physical reason anybody can pinpoint. A guard hears footsteps where steel catwalks used to hang. A young operator flinches at the smell he can't quite name, then catches a minor upset just in time. Somebody's got their own explanation. Faulty wiring, human imagination, barometric pressure. But you sat quiet with the old hands, the ones that remember stories told by men who buried their friends in 1960, the ones who trained under fellas that still flinched at loud bangs. They'll tell you something a little different. They'll say the plant is this big and it has taken as much as it's given. Don't lie there. It remembers. It talks. And sometimes if you're real lucky or real blessed, the dead talk with it. So if you ever ride through Kingsport on an autumn afternoon and catch that strange sweetness in the air, don't wrinkle your nose too hard. You're breathing history, tragedy, and maybe a little ghost. The model city learned a bitter truth in 1960 and got a little bit of a reminder in 2017. That what builds up that can unmake us in a blink of an eye, and that sometimes something on the other side, that blink reaches back and steadies your hand on a valve. Now, y'all take care of your boilers. Keep your eyes on the pressure. And for the love of all things, if the plant starts fussing, don't you dare say, well, we'll look at it, and go back to your coffee. And if it ever does blow again, remember one thing, at least. Get off the phone. I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. And if you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder Mystery and Legend Podcast Group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian murder mystery or legend. I will see you then.